Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
That'll work. I want to get this the right mic and get my voice will carry in the back. I imagine you can hear me, and I'll tell you my real name. My name is Sybil Doris Adams, Stratton, Hart, Maxwell, Willis, CORWIN.
Bingo.
And I am an alcoholic, and you can tell I'm married to an alcoholic. And we're so glad to be here. Long before I ever thought that I would be talking to an AA group or rally in Vancouver, my daughter, who lived in Seattle, we visited her, every year or so. And we'd always come to Vancouver sightseeing because we said then and we say now, it's about the most beautiful city that we've ever been in. It was clean and sparkling. And the Canadian hospitality, good people, love you Canadians, almost want to move up here and leave our 4 dogs and 3 cats behind and start all over again. Because it is lovely country and a good brand of AA. You're charming people. And you know, that's something that Fulton Owsler, the famous writer, said about us so many long years ago. He said, alcoholics are charming. Charming to be with by candlelight. And then he wrote a classic piece about us, and I had Xeroxed 500 copies of them, and I give them away to everybody that I can think about, because this was so long ago that a lot of people don't even remember that particular article, where this famous author called us such charming people to be with. He's talking about members of AA, not drunks. And there's a vast difference there. Now, I was a drunk, an alcoholic, from the time I was a teenager, and didn't want to be. I would, with perfect faith, set off in the morning to go have a short beer across the street from my real estate office, and I wouldn't be seen for 3 days. And I never intended for that to happen. And the old story, I would, when I would get back home from San Francisco or a little town near Modesto there where I would be visiting a girlfriend, I would make all those promises over and over again. It'll never happen again. I don't know how it happened. I only meant to be gone half an hour. And I did this over and over again. Promises just didn't get the job done. And I felt terrible guilt, and I felt a particular remorse, and tried to do better, and I could not believe it that I would get drunk again. And yet there were those occasions when I would feel it coming on in time to clean the house and wax the floors and do the windows and get the cupboards all clean and prepare for my drunk so that they wouldn't be so mad at me when I got back, because the house would be especially clean before I disappeared. But those were rare times, because most of the time I was a rotten housekeeper. And I am today. I never got over that. That's something that I admit freely. And if any of you folks from Canada come to California, you'll have to call me. Call us at least 2 hours in advance that you're going to drop by, so that I can get a hefty bag and begin to round up the trinkets, the stuff that hatches. I don't know where it comes from. A coffee table can be perfectly clean one moment in our house, and pretty soon it'll have a key and a safety pin and the dog's leash and some newspapers and some cigarette butts, and I could go on and on and on about how unrewarding it is for me to give it a good shot and get it all cleaned up, and then I'll have to do it all over again the next day. You're supposed to, you know. You're supposed to. But I don't. I like to go to AA And I can't be a good housekeeper and keep everything spick and span and go to as much AA as I like to go to because I'm 70, I'll be 76 years old in 2 months. And that's old, that's really old. So that's my excuse for being a rotten housekeeper. I don't know what it was 20 years ago, but it's just something that I never did relish too much. My parents were bitterly opposed to drinking, and I was raised in a religious home. And I went to a party when I was, I don't remember, 15 or 16 years old, and somebody handed me a glass of wine. I don't remember anything about the rest of the evening. They carried me into a bedroom and dumped me, and the party went on, and somebody took me home to my mother, and I was so full of remorse and shame I couldn't stand it, and I promised then I'd never do it again. And as I say, it just started happening with increased frequency. And I was puzzled and I was hurt. I knew I was doing the best I could, but I'd never heard the word alcoholic, and I don't think it was used in those days. I just don't think it was used in those days. I was just a no-good drunk, that's what I was. I was a rotten wife and I was a rotten mother, and that was about the way it was. And I suffered a great deal. And sometimes I would be a fighting drunk. I'd be in a bar and I'd break up stuff and go kick the drum in if they had a little three-piece band in there. I'd get mad and I'd really raise the roof. And they'd 86 me out in the street, and I'd go down the street to another bar. And so it was. That was my life. And then the next day, I just couldn't live. I just could not stand it. I was one of those drunks that had to pay bitterly. I would have to crawl from my bed way down the hall to the bathroom to throw up. I would be so sick. And I just hated every bit of it. And I would review it when I was sober and think, I don't have to do that. I'll never drink again. I want to be a good wife and mother. And I'd look at that little baby daughter of mine, and I'd long before she could speak, and I'd say, honey, you're not going to have a drunken mother. I'm not going to do this ever again. And that would be Monday, and by Wednesday I would be doing it all over again. And I was really baffled. I didn't know why. Well, things had gotten so bad after 17 years of that when I drove to San Francisco in a blackout and somehow or other got a hitchhiker to drive me back to Los Angeles, I went into a Turkish bath to get the steam and the massage and all that goes with it so that I could go home and think up a good lie to tell. And before going down there, and I knew it was going to be rough when I got home because Dick had said that he would divorce me and take my little child if I ever disappeared again. And I just wanted one more chance. So I thought I'll have to have time before I go home looking like this. I'll take this Turkish bath, I'll buy this magazine here at the newsstand, and I'll read, get my mind off myself, and sleep after the bath, and then I'll think up a good lie, and then I'll go home. So I bought the magazine. I didn't care what it was. And I went on downstairs in the basement where this Sultan Turkish bath place was at 6th and Hill in Los Angeles, and after the bath I picked up the magazine. It turned out to be the Saturday Evening Post, and on the cover it was dated March 1st, 1941. And at the bottom of it, in letters about this high, it said Alcoholics Anonymous by Jack Alexander. And I got goose pimples. I was so sick and so desperate. And I had read about AA in Liberty magazine 2 years before, a very short piece. I think it was called Alcoholics and God. I can't be too sure. All I know is that it mentioned that there was a small band of alcoholics meeting together regularly in New York, and they called them, for the purposes of mutual sobriety, and they called themselves Alcoholics Anonymous. And at that time, in 1939, I meant to keep that magazine and write the editor and find out how to find them in New York, and I would have gone back there to find those few men in New York that were doing that. But what drunk will? I lost the magazine, lost my chance, and now here it was 1941, and I'm much worse. And here it is again in the Saturday Evening Post, and I think, well, this is my second chance. I better not blow it. And so I rang the bell for the attendant and told her to bring me a pen and pencil and stamp and envelope. You need all four if you're ever going to get a letter mailed, and that was my big trouble with hangovers, is getting all of the stuff on it to stamp and getting it together. And I wrote a desperate letter saying, I'm a desperate woman, alcoholic, wife, and mother, and I need help. Tell me where your AA hospital is, and I will take the next plane back east. Now, what gave me that idea? because I was too sick to read the contents of that magazine, but yet I had this blind faith in AA, having heard about it 2 years before. I simply looked at the pictures and found out all I wanted to know. The one picture, full-page picture, showed a man on a stretcher being put in an ambulance. And I'm in that Turkish bath, and I look at that, and I think, oh, that's a very sick man. He's as bad as I am. They're taking him over to the AA hospital. And I turned the page, and sure enough, there he is in bed in the hospital, and two men are sitting there talking to him. May have been our founders, Bill and Dr. Bob, I don't know. And I further thought then, yes, it's in the East, it's in New York, and it's an AA hospital, simply by the pictures. And so I wrote a desperate letter and said, I'll come back on the next plane if you'll just tell me where you are. And I went on home and waited for my response. And it got back remarkably fast, because Ruth Hawk was Bill Wilson's secretary and had been for many years. I know her personally. She comes out to Los Angeles every year or so to visit her daughter, who is a 12-year member of AA. And she had been Bill Wilson and Hank Parkhurst's secretary long before AA was invented or thought of or anything. And she answered my letter, and she said, you don't have to go east or anywhere else to find AA, because you have AA in California, and they meet at the Elks Temple in Los Angeles every Friday night at 8:30. Well, my non-alcoholic husband, who had threatened to leave me, but he was willing to do anything to help me, he drove me down there that night to the Elks Temple, which is a marvelous big structure, big plush lobby. But they pointed to a little room, a banquet room, and said they're meeting in there. And you understand, starting with 4 men, they had grown to 8 or 10 or something like that by that time, and they were sitting around a table. Not that big, but they were sitting around a table like we do at meetings, the small discussion meetings. And so I went in so hungover and with a red turban around my long hair because I couldn't comb it, and I had a nervous twitch in my lip, which I would have with hangovers, and it would go, every time I'd look at anybody, it would jerk. And I was so embarrassed by that. And so I went in and I sat down at the table with those fellows. My non-alcoholic husband was dressed like a senator, and his glasses, he looked very stern. And I wondered what they were going to do to me. I thought they'd hand me a little pill of some kind and say, take this twice a day for a week and you'll be cured. I thought it'd be something like that. Or I fantasized a little bit and I thought, well, no, maybe they vaccinate you from alcoholism. Maybe they'll just vaccinate me and send me home. And I thought they were doctors. I didn't have the slightest idea what AA was. You can see I didn't read the article. I just looked at the pictures in the Saturday Evening Post. And eventually a man got up at the head of the table and he said, this is a regular meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous in California. We're a band of men who have gathered together to obtain and maintain our sobriety on an all-time basis with no mental reservations whatsoever. And I sat there and I thought, what an order. I can't go through with So I heard what that man said, and I knew I couldn't do it. And so I was still wrapped up in that awful statement. We're here on an all-time basis. And he said, but as is our custom before the regular meetings start, the women will have to leave. And I was the only one. And you can imagine how horribly humiliated and embarrassed I was. And I looked around, and I knew there weren't anything but about a dozen fellows sitting there. But I got up with my hands over my face, and I was crying, and I went out through a door right about here, and I waited out in the lobby, and I skulked around there for hours. Because those guys in California, they had started in December of '39, and just a few. They came from wherever they lived in California to get to that meeting. One guy came from San Bernardino, and another one up near Fresno, and Santa Barbara, there was a man. One from Orange County, and then the rest were the local fellows, you see. And so they had no other meeting. That was it. That was all there was. So they talked as long as they wanted to, and they never heard of a 10 o'clock, meeting over at 9:30 or 10. And I just nearly died out there in the lobby. And finally the doors opened, and out came my husband, non-alcoholic, nice guy that had never had a short beer in his life. And I noticed he tottered over towards me. And I said, well, give me my pills and take me home. I thought they were doctors. And I thought he'd been in there all this time and they had been discussing my case. See? And he said, my God, Sib, you'll never know what they put me through. They thought he was a new man. And they had been giving him all that good stuff in there. You know, the pat on the back and easy does it and first things first and all that. Don't take the first drink. And they'd been 12-stepping him in there all those times, and he was so puzzled that he didn't know what to do. He was a fine, upstanding citizen. I was the one. Well, I was so disappointed, I just cried my eyes out. When we got home, I took the car, and I went to a bar, and boy, I got drunk. And the drunker I got, the madder I got. Being thrown out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remembered at that point, when the bartender threw me out, there was a payphone on the wall outside. I remembered that I had that letter from New York in my purse, which had been, I took it with me down there to the mother group, and I had rehearsed this, because I was very timid when I was sober and hungover. And I was going to go up there to the head man with this letter with the New York address on it, showing that it was an official letter from New York. And I was going to say, my name is Sybil Maxwell, and I have here an official letter from the Home Office of Alcoholics Anonymous in New York, which entitles me to every privilege. And I was going to hand it to the leader, or whoever he was. And here they had thrown me out, I thought, and I never had gotten a chance to show them my letter. And now I was so drunk, and I thought, now's the time. I'll tell them. So I put a nickel in the telephone, and I dialed a number that Ruth Hawk had put in that letter at the bottom. P.S. If you need help, call Cliff Walker. You'll read about him in AA Comes of Age. And he took care of all the drunks for AA until our central office started in 1944. Now here it is, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I got my letter, got his phone number off of it, and I put a nickel in the telephone, called poor Cliff. And I said, send your AA ambulance and pick me up. I had a perfect vision of that ambulance in the Saturday Evening Post, you know, with a man being put in a stretcher. And I thought that's how you did it. And he said, you're drunk. I said, well, of course. I said, I went down to your exclusive group tonight and they threw me out. She said, no, that's not possible. But they did. They said all the women have to go. Well, he said, look, you misunderstood everything and there's been a horrible mistake. Now, I wasn't down there at that meeting because I work nights and I have a Sunday daytime meeting at home, but I know how they go because I've been down there a lot of times when I didn't have this night job. The wives come, they're non-alcoholic, and they are not permitted to stay because it's a closed for alcoholics meeting, and the wives wait out in the lobby for their husbands. And that's what they did before Al-Anon, don't you see? And so they thought you were the wife and that your husband was the drunk. Well, I wouldn't buy that, but that's really what happened. They weren't trying to get rid of me. They just thought that Dick was the alcoholic, and they gave him a good shot, and they didn't know that I was on this earth. And he said, you got to go back. I'll call them, and next Friday you go back. And they will know that you're the woman that waited out in the lobby and didn't get to come in and got drunk afterwards and so forth, because I'll tell them all about it. It's very unfortunate. I'm sorry it happened. Well, I was so mad. Here it was late, and I was afraid to go home. I didn't know what kind of treatment I'd get there. And I was furious, and I said, young man, you're telling me to go home, go home. I'll go home, all right, for just one reason. I can't wait till morning, and I'm going to get in touch with that New York office, and I'm going to have you fired. Well, it turned out that Cliff Walker was my sponsor because there were no women alcoholics. I was the first one. And in a way, I want you to know that I might not be standing here tonight. I've got all the attention that anybody ever wanted. I was 32, going on 33 years old then. And this month is my 76th birthday. I won't be 76 till the 20th, so I got a couple of weeks to go before, at 75. But here poor old Cliff did the best he could for me, and I was absolutely furious. And I don't think I would have ever gone back. I was too timid. I was scared. And I didn't feel wanted. The treatment that I got down there, which of course was not designed to be that way. But my brother Tex came over, a big fat Texan, 280 pounds, and he and I used to drink together all the time, and he would finally wouldn't even drink with me, and he'd say, Sib, you're the worst woman drunk I've ever seen in my life. I don't want to be seen with you anymore. And that was a bad endorsement from a drunk that I had bailed out of jail 89 times, I'll tell you. But he did come over to my real estate office, and he happened to pick up that Saturday Evening Post, and he read it, and I said, I've been down there, and I saw those people. Well, I'm glad for you, Sib. You certainly are a mess. And, of course, I don't have that problem. But he said all the guys that work for me on Skid Row, and by this time he'd lost his dairy and his business, and he was peddling vegetables from Produce Row in Los Angeles. And he said, those winos down there are dying like flies, so I'm going down to get all the information for the guys that work for me. And I looked at him and I said, Tex, please don't go to AA. My brother that I love so much, my drinking partner. I wanted it all for myself, because he always took charge, you know. And I said, please don't go. Now, I didn't know then that that was good psychology. You tell a drunk, now, don't you dare go to AA. And he'll say, well, I'll go if I want to. And that's exactly what he did. The following Friday night, he pulled up in front of my house in his vegetable truck, and standing up and back were 11 of those winos that worked for him down on Skid Row. His whole crew that peddled cantaloupes and oranges and everything door to door. So I got up in the cab of the truck, and here we went down to the mother group, all of 11 winos and Tex and I, and we got down there. Nothing much had happened to that group. There were more of us than there were of them. But this time, Cliff had phoned Frank Randall, who was an eloquent man, and he was our leader. You didn't have committees then, and a rotating system. If you started a group, you owned it. We had no traditions, and that's the way it was. And if you had a really good personality and made a fine talk, some of our fellows would own a group for 5 or 10 years. And so Frank Randall owned that group till 1946 when he died, or he'd still own it, I'm sure. He was that eloquent. So there we go down to the meeting, and Cliff had informed them that some drunk woman that called me up would probably be there. And I didn't listen to all of this reading out of the big book or the 12 steps. I don't know whether new people hear all that and really understand it at first. I was just waiting I was so scared. I was waiting for them to throw me out again or something. And I was embarrassed. So I didn't hear any of that. And I was afraid my brother would raise his hand and say, I beg your pardon, let me tell you how it really is, or some terrible thing like that. All I was doing was worrying. And then pretty soon Frank left the podium and he went out somewhere and got a huge brown carton full of mail. It was full, I imagine 500 or 600 letters. And they had been forwarded from New York from people hurting from booze, alcoholics, who wrote a letter just like mine, but my letter got there a little ahead of time. And now they have 500 or 600 12-step calls that Ruth Hawk had mailed back to the leader of the California group. And Frank said, hear this, you jokers. Now, if any of you have been sober 15 minutes, I want you to come up here and get these 12-step calls as I call out the counties and the towns that they come from in California. We got to go and see those drunks and bring them back down here by next Friday, or some of them could die. And I heard that, and I was just fascinated, you know. And he said, Orange County, and Mel Trickey, a real estate broker, raised his hand and said, here. And he came up, and Frank had them all bundled up, you know, according to where they lived. And he had 50 or 60 of them bundled up with white twine. And Mel took his big stack of 12-step calls, letters, from people begging for help, and went back to his seat, and he said, Riverside and San Bernardino. And Kent Hayden went up and got a similar stack, and I won't go through all the beaches, and Curly O'Neill had Long Beach down to Laguna. Anyway, he got rid of all those calls, and there was one stack there, and I'm sitting right about where you are, and I'm real interested in all that. And there's this big stack. And he said, now, that's all of the 12-step calls, except for this big bundle here, and they're all from women who wrote in for help. And Cliff Walker called me about a woman who called up drunk last week, and he told her to come down here. And so he said, are you Sybil Maxwell? And I said, yes, sir. And he says, well, I thought so. We have a woman alcoholic now. So, Sybil, I want you to come on up here, because I'm going to put you in charge of all the women. So I didn't budge. I mean, my God, all those people. And this nervous twitch was just twitching. Tears were in my eyes. My eyes were so bloodshot, and I was all bloated. I had a red turban on my head to cover up my long hair. It had one of those old-fashioned permanents that was kinky, and I couldn't comb it. Oh, I looked bad. I think the dress was long, and they were wearing them short. I was wearing them short when they were wearing them long. I never was right in, It was a mess. And he said, Sybil, I said, come on up here. And so I said, yes, sir, and I finally got up there, and he said, now, I'm going to put you in charge of all the women. And I said, but I can't do that, sir. He says, yeah, but I'm putting you in charge of all the women, and you have to bring them down here next Friday to the next meeting. But I can't. And he said, why not? I said, because I'll be drunk by next Friday. I meant it. I said, I don't know how you're doing this. Nobody's gotten around to telling me how you're doing this. They hadn't either. I wonder if ever a newcomer comes now these days and they leave the meeting and they wonder if that's all they ever do is just have a guest speaker and they go home. And that's it. I said, nobody's told me how you're doing it. So I said, I've always been drunk ever since I was 15 or 16, and so I don't know how you're staying sober. He says, is that a fact? Well, I'll have to tell you about that. So I said, I don't want to get drunk and those women lose their chance and not be able to do it. I thought I'd be honest with you. Well, he says, that's very admirable. But he said, you said, but you want to get sober. Oh, so I sure do, I said, but I can't. I never have. And how can I guarantee that? How can I guarantee that I will be sober enough to go and ring those doorbells? And what will I say? He said, very little. You don't know anything. He said, the only thing you have to do is to get the letters and segregate them according to the towns and the location, so you won't be going from Glendale to Pasadena to the beaches and back and around. And then you read the letter and you put them geographically where you'll kind of be going more or less in the same direction. You ring the doorbell, and when the girl comes to the door, you hold the letter up and say, did you write this letter? My name is Sybil, and I'm an alcoholic. Did you write this letter asking for help with a drinking problem like I did? And if she did, she'll say, yes, that's my handwriting. Say, well, I wrote them a letter, and my letter was answered, and I've been down to their meeting, and I saw them, and they looked good. They were all smiling and laughing, and they never got around to telling me how to do it, but they told me to come and get you. He said, that's a 12-step call. I said, is that all there is to it? And he said, that's it, and just go get her. So that's all I did, is ring doorbells and bring the women to the meetings, and I was in charge. And I stayed in charge for a while. And then a girl came in one night, and this is what it meant to be in charge. I had a book. I reported to our leader. We had no traditions, and as I say, he was there for a long time. And I would put in my book the name of the girl, Mary, Susie, Jane, so forth. And then I would put the name of the girl that I gave the call to, and then the girl had to report back to me. The sponsor had to report on the sponsee, and they would give me back the report, and then I would take it down there and give it to the head man on Friday night. And I would look out in the audience, and if there were 20 girls, there'd be 20 sponsors and 20 sponsees. And Frank would say, my, Sybil, you're doing great. And I stayed sober from that day to this. Now, Frank said, I must point out to you, Sybil, in the big book, which you haven't read, and he was right, our founder said that when all other measures fail, working with another alcoholic will save the day. And he picked up the big red book, the first edition, and he read that. When all other measures fail, working with another alcoholic will save the day. Well, so much ensures sobriety is intensive work with other alcoholics. And Frank said, it doesn't say after you've been sober 6 months or a year, because none of them had been. None of us had been, you see. It doesn't say that. He says that's what Bill did. He worked with 75 alcoholics, and none of them would listen. And he went home to his wife, Lois, one day and said, Lois, I'm going to quit doing this. Nobody will listen. They're all drunk. I'm a failure. And Lois said, Bill, you're not a failure. You have been sober 6 months, the longest that you've been sober since we've been married. And he said, by golly, Lois, I think you're right. I guess I'll give it another shot. And he was very discouraged at that time. And right after that, he went over to Akron, and you know who he found, Dr. Bob. And that's the way it began. Through great discouragement and working with a lot of people that had never heard the word alcoholism and weren't really willing to, well, maybe some of them had the idea that I had, but I didn't care. When I came to AA, I thought, when I walked down my street, I had thought that I would go down there and I'd find a bunch of people with black masks on. I thought they'd have black masks on and they would be very, you'd be unable to see what they look like. And the anonymity part of it appealed to me so strongly. It sounded so adventurous that when the first few days that I was sober, after going to my next meeting where, I got sober and stayed sober, I'd walk down the street to the store, to the market, and I'd look at the neighbors' homes all the way down the block on each side. And I was so impressed with this thing that I'd look at those houses and I'd think, and I'd say out loud to myself, they don't know it, but I'm anonymous. I was very proud of that. I was anonymous. And I would have liked very much if we'd have all worn the black masks and all that. But it didn't turn out just this way. And we grew, and my brother Tex never had another drink. And pretty soon, with no traditions, you know what began to happen. The mother group began to excommunicate people. You can stay, but you can't. You got to go, and you can stay, but you don't behave properly, so you got to go. And then the night came that Tex said, I'm tired of driving all the way down there to that mother group when we've been meeting in homes in Long Beach on Wednesday night, 8 or 9 of us, at Curly O'Neill's house. He said, I think it's ridiculous. I think I'll start a group at about the halfway point from the beaches to downtown. And he did. And the mother group heard about it, so when he walked into the next Friday night meeting, the powers that be had talked it over, and they met him at the door. And they said, you have no loyalty to the mother group, and you have been excommunicated. And Tex said, what? They said, we don't want you. You started another group. We don't need you. So we have had a little caucus over here in the corner, and we have decided to excommunicate you. Furthermore, Joe here is an attorney, and he has incorporated Alcoholics Anonymous, which will prevent anyone from ever starting another group unless they get our permission. And Tex laughed his head off, and he says, you've incorporated AA in California? He said, you might as well incorporate a sunset. It can't be done. I'll lay you 8 to 5 that we'll have hundreds of groups in California within a few years. Or within a few months even, we're going to have 50 or 60, and he was right, of course. And it took about a year for all of that rivalry to die down and everybody to get comfortable. But in the meantime, it was really a lot of fun, feuding and fighting and and not agreeing. We'd get on the telephone and I'd say, he did? Oh, my, he can't do that. And we found out that we had no control over anything and not even ourselves. And life was good. And I thought that because I was a member of AA, that nothing bad would ever happen. I had such supreme faith in AA. I'm glad I did. And it was so glorious, riding back and forth to the meetings with my brother Tex, going to the Hole in the Ground in Huntington Park to his meeting on Thursday nights, and going down to the mother group on Fridays, and then finally visiting the new groups that just started. And Tex would take his group, our group, and we'd close up shop to go over and make the crowd for a new group that was getting started. And that was the custom then, is to take at least half your group and hold your meeting open at your home group, but to go over and help them out. And so we'd go to the beaches and help new groups get started, and we were making 12-step calls. We didn't have any recovery homes, so when anybody was broke, I don't know how many times I have seen the fellows get over in a corner, and we didn't put dollar bills in the hat. We put quarters and 50-cent pieces. And Joe here would be broke, and the word would be out that he needs a place to stay. So the fellows would get together and round up $2 or whatever and go down and rent the room for him so he would have a place to stay that night, the new guy, you know, if he was busted. No recovery homes at all, and those that we didn't put up at a hotel temporarily, we took them in our homes. We'd take them home with us, and I took a lot of women to my home. One of them lived with me there for 6 months. Her name was Irma. And she would drive with me to the meetings, and I just loved her to death. And she helped me in my real estate office doing the paperwork, and she'd go to the meetings with me and everything. And she finally rented an apartment a couple of blocks away from my house and got drunk the next day, and it nearly killed me. It really did. I thought, my God, she can't do that. You don't get drunk in AA. And again, this blind faith that I had that you were there to stay sober probably kept me from getting drunk. I know I came home from a meeting one night, and I had a new Ford, and I went out in the drive. I left it in the driveway to go in the house and get something and go somewhere else. And I came out of the house, and it was gone. And my car had been stolen. Now, I'm kind of new. And the bar right across the street on Figueroa, because it was a business street, my real estate office was on a business street, and my house was in back of it, I dashed across to Charlie's bar, where I'd done a lot of my drinking. And I dashed in there. I said, "Hey, Charlie, give me a Coke." I went in there to get a drink. I went in there to get a drink. I was in a state of excitement, and I was shaking, and my new car was gone, and I'd forgotten about AA or staying sober or anything. I just went to pieces. And I went in there, and I said, "Hey, Charlie, give me a Coke." He said, "Sybil, are you crazy? You don't drink Cokes. Don't you mean a straight shot?" I said, "I guess not." So I got a nickel and went over to the payphone there and called the cops and reported my car stolen and passed a test. I passed a test. I didn't drink. And then later I got to thinking about it. I passed the test. I went in my drinking bar, said, "Give me a Coke." And it made me feel pretty good to think that what was important to me at that moment, I didn't drink over it. But then as the years passed, I found that life couldn't possibly be that marvelous honeymoon forever. My brother and I bought a boxing and wrestling arena. I had bought a number of homes, and I had been renting those out and selling them, and I put all of the money from all of those homes into the boxing and wrestling arena, and Tex ran it for me, and that is, we were partners in it. He was the manager, and I worked down there also, and it was very strenuous. And we made a lot of money the first year or two. And then TV came along, and you know about what year that would have been, 1950, 51, or whatever, and everybody stayed home. I had this big arena there with the bleachers and the loges, and we had boxing on Tuesdays and wrestling on Thursdays, and we had the concession, and we sold popcorn and hot dogs, and the whole thing, you know. It was a lot of money I was making, and overnight, that investment was gone. But I wouldn't believe it, and I kept going down there and opening up that joint, and then we finally got down to where there was just a couple of rows of faithful people, and I had to close the doors. And I had the wreckers come and tear that building down. I got $1,200 out of it. That's what eventually happened. But I made the mistake of letting that bother me more than it should have ever bothered me. It truly did bother me a lot, because I had to go back to work as a secretary, something I had done in my younger days, and I went back and got a job as a secretary. I was married to a fine man who eventually caused another crisis in my life. He was a good man, and he had adopted my baby daughter. I had married a drunk when I was very young, and he abandoned me and went back to his parents in New York. And so Mama raised the baby during a lot of my drinking years. And then after I sobered up, I had her. But I met this man, and I had to have money to support that baby, and I went to work in a taxi dance hall. Didn't like it. You have to have your picture taken in case you turn up missing or something. But I went down there, and this man, well-dressed man, bought a big roll of tickets, and he danced with me all evening. And during intermission, we would go out, like over there, where they had tables set up, and they served pitchers of beer for $2 or something like that. And I got half of that for all I could drink, and I was going to drink it anyway. And he bought this huge string of tickets, and he didn't dance with anyone else. So while we were doing intermission, I began to tell him my sad tale. I've got this little girl, beautiful little girl, like I have to work here to support her, and I hate it. I just hate it. And her father ran away and left me with her, and I couldn't get a job doing anything else. So here I am, and I just don't know what to do. And I told him all of this stuff. And I was still drinking this stuff, and he said, "Oh, you poor little thing. A nice little girl like you don't belong in a place like this. Now, he says, I want to tell you what. I have money, and you need financial security. That seems to be your problem, and I have more than I can use. And I would be pleased to adopt your little girl and be her father. So he says, let's get married. I says, well, let's do. So that takes care of husband number 3. And he was a marvelous father, and he was a wonderful man. I'm getting to the point now I'm in AA, and Addie has all of the comforts that she can. My little girl was growing up, and he was a marvelous guy. But he did not drink. Therefore, no Al-Anon, and I was going to meetings. And one night, I was going to the Hole in the Ground, my brother's group, the nights they met, and the mother group downtown, because I was still in charge of the women. I hadn't been thrown out yet. And one night, I came home from a meeting. And Dick was standing there, and that stubborn chin of his was jutted out, and he said, again? Now, that was familiar, because he used to say that when I'd come home drunk. Again? You promised, he said. You promised me you'd cut out most of those meetings. You're gone almost every night to those AA meetings, and I'm left sitting here. You promised. And I felt desolate. He was sitting in a rocking chair, I remember one night, rocking back and forth, and his chin jutted out. Again, you promised. And I went over and I sat down on the floor and put my head in his lap, and I said, I promise I'll cut back on those AA meetings. I will be a good wife and mother. That's all I want to be, is a good wife and mother, and I can cut back on those AA meetings. And I tried, and I couldn't, and I wouldn't. It just wasn't that way. I was too enthusiastic. It's what I needed. It's what I had to have. So then I came home one night from the Hole in the Ground meeting, and he met me at the door with a smile. And he said, honey, come on in. I've got the solution to our marriage. Oh, that's good. Let's go in the living room, turn on the light, tell me what it is. And he says, well, I've been thinking. And it'll work. It'll work. He said, I've been thinking about this. He said, I want you to go back to drinking like you did in the good old days, and I'll take care of you. He says, it'll be better than this. Well, as I'm telling you this, I'm reacting to it. I stood there and I didn't bawl him out or scream and hoop and holler or throw dishes or anything. I stood there forever, it seemed. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked up the stairs and packed a suitcase. And I walked back out, and he was not in the hall any longer. I guess he'd gone into the bathroom in the kitchen or something. And I walked out into the driveway, and there was my nice black shiny car. I looked at it a few minutes. I knew I had something in my purse in the way of money. I didn't know whether it was enough to do anything with. And I walked on down, caught a streetcar, and rented a room, and I never looked back. And I went out then the next day or so and got a job on the Times newspaper. I went to work because the chips were down. Either get drunk and die or get the hell out of here. And I had to do it, and it broke my heart. But my daughter had been married at a very young age, 16 or 17. She was no longer at home, and I had to do it. And it was with great pain, because he was a lovely man, but he had no understanding. He wouldn't go to the AA meetings with me at all. He'd say, why should I go? I don't drink. I'm not a drunk. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't see any reason for me to go. He would go at Christmas or Thanksgiving to one of their dinners or something like that. It was very painful, but it was something that I had to do or get drunk. And he would have taken care of me. Maybe he enjoyed taking care of me. I don't know. But anyway, there I was in this housekeeping room. Now what am I going to do? So I get a job on the newspaper. And I was paying about $10 a week, I think, in the bathroom down the hall, and a gas plate in this room that I had. And I just was absolutely heartbroken. I was so lonely. There was a big church down at the corner, big church, and I would hear those bells toll, ding dong, every morning. I didn't need an alarm clock. And I'd get up and get dressed, and I'd go down to the Times and work, and I'd go up on the roof to the cafeteria and have my dinner, and then I'd go back to that room. And Christmas came, and I went down to the little corner grocery store to get some coffee or something, and I bought a little Christmas tree this high and took it back to that room, didn't put any trimmings on it or anything, just sitting there, just me, and going on a streetcar out to the hole in the ground in Huntington Park, which was about an hour's ride from there. And that was a difficult thing that I had to do. I had to either do that or get drunk. And while I was there in that room, I would walk down the hall, and there was a girl that would call me in by her bed to talk to her. She'd lay there, and there'd be empty bottles on the floor by her. My room was way down the hall, you know, and hers was halfway down on the same side. And she'd say, "Hello, Sybil, come on in." And I'd go in, and there'd be these empty bottles all around. And I told her, I'd go in and I'd tell her I was going to AA, and I'd have to catch a bus and go out to the hole in the ground in Huntington Park. "Oh, I don't want any part of that. I've heard it. I've read all about it." And I couldn't do anything for her. And I tried. But every night when I came home from work, she'd call me in there to talk to her. And I would say, "Listen, Lena, will you let me put you in the hospital?" "No, no, no. Daddy and Mama are coming to get me and take me back to Kansas, and I'm waiting for them to get here." And so the next evening she'd be a little worse. And then I went in one evening and she said, "Sybil, Mom and Daddy are going to be here tomorrow, and I need to get up and get dressed, and I don't want to shame them. They're going to drive me back to Kansas. Now, will you go down to the corner liquor store and get me a half pint?" And I said, "No. I have a rule. I have never broken it. I swore when I came to AA I'd never buy a drunk a drink, that they were able to get their own booze. They were always able to get their own booze, and that I wouldn't contribute to their disease. I have to have it, Sybil, or I can't get out of bed when Mom and Daddy comes. It means everything to me to get out and to get a bath and get cleaned up. Please get me a half pint." And so I did. And then I left her there with it and went on down to my room. And so the next morning, I was walking by her room. The door was open, and I went in to see how she was. And she was dead. And that just about killed me. If you knew Sybil, you'd know I said immediately, "I've killed her, I've killed her, I've killed her." And I flew out of there, and I didn't go to work, and I caught a streetcar out to the hole in the ground. It's open, always open in the daytime. It wasn't a club, but it was always open and the coffee on. And I told all of those that were gathered around there drinking early morning coffee, I said, "I've killed a drunk." They said, "What'd you do?" I said, "I bought her a half pint." And they began to laugh at me, and they said, "Look, do you think you have the power of life and death over somebody like that that's been drinking and has been drinking for all those years?" She had pneumonia of some type, we're sure, because of her being there that long. And you had nothing to do with it, and you just can't react like that because you're a very kind person and you thought you were doing the right thing. It troubled me a great deal. But I had to get over that and realize that I had done the best I could, and that lots of people in AA will give another drunk a drink, and they get along fine and get well and come to AA. And so that was a terribly rough period in my life for, a long, long time. And then I began to get better, and I started going back out to the hole in the ground a lot. And I had some bad years in there when Tex died, because I knew he was going to die. He'd had a bad heart all those years, but he kept living so many, many happy, productive years after the doctors told him he couldn't, that when he died, I was so used to the idea of him dying, I didn't react the way I should. He would get up there at the hole in the ground every night, huffing and puffing, and with his little oxygen thing that he'd breathe into, and say, "Now then, you drunks quit laughing now. You're laughing at a dying man." And they'd just hoop and holler, and he'd tell them a joke, and then with his wisdom and with the newcomers, he'd sit out on the steps with them after the meeting, and they just adored him. He had a magic touch with new people in particular. So when they came to my house, I lived 2 blocks from there at the time. I had moved out to Huntington Park and told me that at long last, after all those years of battling with that heart, that my brother was gone. I didn't feel anything. And that's bad. It's much better to get mad or cry or react the way that you feel. But I got stone cold and dispassionate. And I bolstered up the members, and I comforted them and never shed a tear. And there's something wrong there. And that went on for 5 weeks. My father had died in June, and Tex died October 9th, 1952. So there were 2 deaths in the family, and maybe that was too much. I don't know, for me to react the way I did. Maybe that was the cause of it, or part of it. But anyway, I didn't, and I began to hurt in a way that I cannot describe to you. I did not recognize it as grief because I went to the meetings every night. But the funny part of it was, the hole in the ground, my home group that I've been going to all those great many years, Now then, I'd look around the room there at my dear friends who would come up to me and say, "How are you, Syb?" And I'd say, "Oh, I'm fine. How are you?" But I wasn't. I could have crawled in their lap and cried, and it would have been better, but I didn't do that. And to me, the hole in the ground began to take on the atmosphere of a bar. It looked gloomy and dark and dingy, and I'd look around and I'd think, it's just like kind of being in a bar. I'm not getting any good out of this. And I'd go home and I'd be lonely some more. Some of the women would come up to the house and knock at my door, and I'd say, "I'm just leaving to go to the bank," or "I'm just leaving to go downtown." I'd get rid of them. And it got unbearable. Now, I don't know what possessed me or made me react like that. I didn't talk it over with a human being in that group, my pain. And finally, I wrote to Bill Wilson, our founder, whom I knew rather well. He'd been out to California a few times and talked to us in the early days just to see how his program was doing. And so I wrote him this letter. Tex had been invited to spend a week up at Bedford Hills, Bill Wilson's home. To the new people, Bill Wilson is the guy that invented this, if that's a word. And so naturally, not being able to talk to a human being in the group but just show a lot of teeth and tell them I'm fine all the time when I'm suffering so badly, I wrote this letter to Bill, and I said, "I don't know what's the matter with me. Tell me, Bill. A funny thing, Bill, I don't feel like drinking, and I'm not going to drink. But I may die. Something's got to happen. Something's got to happen to me to snap out of this. What shall I do?" And honestly, I got a letter back with great haste. And I think it was dated November 9th, 1952. November 11th, maybe. And it said, "My dear Syb, your recent letter stirred me more than anything I have read in many a day. I knew your brother Tex well. He said, in God's house there are many mansions, and somehow or other I see your brother Tex sitting out on the porch of one of those mansions in the sunlight talking to another drunk. And that's how it should be, and I hope that it'll be that way when my time comes. But as for you, my dear, let me tell you this. Life is but a long day in school. Some of our lessons will be hard, and some of our lessons will be easy. It's not so much what happens to us here, but it's what we will do with the experiences we have. It's the demonstration that counts." And I read that letter, and the great meaning of it swept over me, and I sat there in a rocking chair, I remember, and I read it again, that part about life is but a long day in school. Some of our lessons are hard, some of our lessons are easy. It's not so much what happens to us here, but it's what we do with the experience that we have. And I began to cry. And I cried. And what a great release it was to be a human being again and get on with the business of living. And that letter, having saved my life, Bill put a little paragraph in there, said, "If you like what I have said, my dear, feel free to share it with anyone or your group that might like to read it." And so I think I may have Xeroxed 5,000 copies since 1952. And really, not all at once. No. But somebody will hear about it and say, "Would you mail me that letter of Bill's?" "Oh, sure." Maybe they just experienced a bad time or a death or something. And I know I made that statement in Phoenix when I was there not too long ago, and I said I'd be happy to mail anyone a letter who wants it. And 27 of them came up and said, letter, and I'd say, drop your address right there. And I love to mail those letters out because I feel like it's sharing something that probably saved my life, or at least it fixed me up in real good shape. And I'm still quoting the letter, which is still helping me. And it is a powerful thing to consider that life is but a long day in school, and that our lessons are hard, and our lessons are easy, and whatever happens to us puts us in a position to talk to somebody else who is having the same problem, you see. And so the letter meant a lot to me then. It means a lot to me now, and I still got a big stack of them at home. If anybody wants a copy of it, I'll mail it to you within a month. I won't say next week, because I know me. I procrastinate. So it's a great life, and I think I'm the most privileged person in the face of the earth. That doesn't mean that I'm always happy. It means that I'm still a rotten housekeeper, and I've given up on that. I have my limitations. You'll never make me like washing dishes. You'll never really make me enjoy marketing or sweeping up or getting rid of dog fur and cat fur. But we love our animals so much, or we wouldn't live like that, I'm sure. I had to really brush up on my cloak and my clothes before I could come up here to Canada, because there's various colored hairs on it. We have various colored animals, and a little shedding from a cat. I'm sure the cat slept on my cloak all night last night. But that's our lifestyle, and that's the way we like it. And it's very rewarding to have the little four-leggeds around, I'll tell you, and we do enjoy them. But most of all, it's my life, and the biggest thing in my life is being married to another alcoholic who loves AA the way Bob loves AA. And I want to tell you, it never gets too rough at our house until he steps in and makes it all right. And that's the way it's been 43 years. And I'll come back here when I've been, say when I'm 99 years old. Will that do? I'll come back and tell you what has happened since I've been up here this time. And I want to thank you for listening to me.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.